Chapter 3 Jinshi. "They're at it again," Jinshi muttered glumly to himself. It was unseemly, the way the blossoms of the palace carried on sometimes. It fell to Jinshi, one among his many responsibilities, to quiet things down. As he waded into the crowd, Jinshi saw one person walking along as if the uproar didn't concern her. She was a petite girl with freckles peppering her nose and cheeks. There was nothing else distinctive about her, except that she paid no heed at all to Jinshi as she walked along, muttering to herself. Princess Lingli, the half-sister of the deceased prince, soon recovered from her indisposition, and she and her mother became a great comfort to the bereaved emperor. Indeed, it seemed likely consort Gyokyo might soon bear another child, given how often his majesty visited. The prince and princess had both suffered from the same mysterious illness, yet one had recovered while the other had succumbed. Could it be the age gap between them? It had been just 3 months, but such a span could make a significant difference in an infant's resilience. And what of Liwa? If the princess had made a recovery, then there was every reason the consort should be able as well, unless she was suffering chiefly from the psychological shock of losing her son. Jinshi turned these thoughts over in his head as he reviewed some paperwork and pressed his chop to it. If there was any difference between the two children, perhaps it lay with consort Gyokyo. "I'm going out for a while," Jinshi said as he stamped the final page with his chop, and promptly left the room. The princess, cheeks as full and rosy as steamed buns, smiled at him with all the innocence a child could muster, her tiny hand clasped into a fist around Jinshi's finger. "No, child, let him go," her mother, a red-haired beauty, scolded gently. She wrapped the infant in swaddling clothes and put her down to sleep in her crib. The princess, apparently too warm, kicked the coverings off and lay watching the visitor, gurgling happily. "I presume you wish to ask me something?" said the consort, always a perceptive woman. Jinshi got right to the point. Why did the princess recover her health? Consort Gyokyo allowed herself the smallest of smiles before pulling a piece of cloth from a pouch. The cloth had been torn off of something and was adorned with ungainly characters. Not only was the handwriting uneven, but the message appeared to have been written using grass stains, so in places it was faded and difficult to read. "Your face powder is poison. Don't let it touch the baby." Perhaps the faltering quality of the handwriting was deliberate. Jinshi cocked his head. "Your face powder?" "Yes," Gyokyo said, entrusting the child in the crib to a wet nurse and opening a drawer. She took out something wrapped in cloth, a ceramic vessel. She opened the lid to a puff of white powder. "This?" "The very same." Perhaps, Jinshi conjectured, there was something in the powder. He remembered that Gyokyo, already possessing the pale skin that was so prized at court, didn't need to use the powder to try to make herself more beautiful. Consort Liwa, in contrast, looked so sallow that she used more of it every day to conceal her condition. "My little princess is quite a hungry girl," Gyokyo said. "I don't make enough milk for her, so I hired a nurse to help." Sometimes mothers whose children had died shortly after birth found work as wet nurses. This face powder belonged to that woman. She favored it because she felt it was whiter than other powders. "And where is this nurse now?" "She took ill, so I dismissed her. With ample funds for her livelihood, of course." Spoken like a woman who was both intellectual and perhaps too kind for her own good. "So say there was some kind of poison in the face powder. If the mother were to use it, it would impact the child. If whatever was in the powder got into the mother's milk, it might even end up in the child's body." Neither Jinshi nor Gyokyo knew what such a poison might be, but if the mysterious message was to be believed, it was how the young prince had met his end. By simple face powder, makeup used by any number of people in the rare palace. "Ignorance is a sin," Gyokyo said. "I should have taken more care with what was going into my child's mouth." "I'm guilty of the same crime," Jinshi said. It was ultimately he who had allowed the emperor's son to be lost, and there may have been others who had died in the womb. "I told Consort Liwa about the face powder, but anything I say only makes her dig in her heels," said Gyokyo. Liwa had dark bags under her eyes even now, and used ample helpings of the white makeup to conceal the poor color of her face, never believing it was poisonous. Jinshi gazed at the simple cotton cloth. He thought it looked strangely familiar. The hesitant quality of the characters appeared to be a ruse, but the hand had an unmistakably feminine quality. Who gave this to you, and when? It came the day I demanded the doctor examine my daughter. I'm afraid I only succeeded in causing you trouble, but this was by the window afterward. It was tied to a rhododendron branch. Jinshi remembered the commotion that day. Had someone in the crowd noticed something, realized something, left a word of warning? But who? No doctor in the palace would resort to such circuitous methods, he said. I agree, and ours never did seem to know how to treat the prince. All that commotion. On reflection, Jinshi did remember a serving girl who had seemed distracted from the other rubbernecks. She had been talking to herself. What was it she had been saying? I need something to write on. Jinshi felt the pieces fall into place. He started to chuckle. Consort Gyokyo, if I were to find the author of this message, what would you do with her? I would thank her profusely. I owe her my daughter's life, the consort said, her eyes sparkling. Ah, so she was keen to discover her benefactor. Very well. Perhaps you would allow me to keep these for a short while. I eagerly await whatever you may discover. Gyokyo looked happily at Jinshi. He returned her smile, then collected the jar of face powder and the cloth with the message on it. He searched his memory for any cloth that felt quite like this. Far be it from me to disappoint His Majesty's favorite lady. Jinshi's smile had all the innocence of a child on a treasure hunt. Chapter 4. The Nymph's Smile. Mao Mao first learned of the prince's passing when black mourning sashes were distributed at the evening meal. The women would wear them for 7 days to demonstrate their sorrow. But what caused more frowns than anything was the announcement that their serving of meat, already meagerly, would be eliminated entirely for the duration. The women servants ate 2 meals a day, chiefly Malayan soup, with the occasional vegetable. It was enough for the appetite Mao Mao had, but many of the women found the meals something less than filling. There were many kinds of women among this lowest class of servants. Some came from farming families, others were city girls, and although uncommon, a few were the daughters of officials. Children of the bureaucracy could expect a modicum more respect, but even so, the work a woman was given to do depended on her own accomplishments. A girl who couldn't read or write could certainly not expect to become a consort with her own chambers. Being a consort was a job. You even got a salary. I guess maybe it didn't matter in the end. Mao Mao was aware of what had killed the young prince. It was Consort Liwa's and her serving women's liberal use of white powder to cover her face. That powder was so expensive, the average citizen couldn't expect to use it a day in her life. Some of the more established ladies in the brothel had had it, though. Some of them made more money in a single night than a farmer would earn in his entire lifetime, and they could afford their own makeup. Others received it as an expensive present. The women would cover themselves in it from their faces down to their necks, and it would eat away at their bodies. Some of them died from it. Mao Mao's father had warned them to stop using it, but they ignored him. Mao Mao, attending at her father's side, had witnessed several courtesans waste away and die with her own eyes. They had weighed their lives against their beauty, and in the end had lost them both. That was why Mao Mao had broken off a couple of convenient branches, scrawled a brief message to each of the consorts, and left it for them. Not that she had expected them to heed a warning from a servant girl who couldn't get her hands on so much as paper or a brush. After the mourning period was over and the black sashes disappeared, she began to hear rumors about Consort Gyokyo. People said that after the loss of the prince, the emperor, sick at heart, had begun to take comfort with Gyokyo and his surviving daughter, but to Consort Liwa, who had lost her child just as he did not go. How convenient for him. Mao Mao drained her bowl of soup, today furnished with the smallest sliver of a piece of fish, then cleaned up her utensils and headed to work. A summons, sir? Mao Mao was carrying a laundry basket when she was stopped by a eunuch, who told her to report to the office of the matron of the serving women. The office of serving women was one of the 3 major divisions of service in the rear palace, and encompassed responsibility for the lowest ranking of the women servants. The other 2 divisions were the office of the interior, which dealt with the consorts, and the domestic service department, to which the eunuchs were attached. What could she want with me? Mao Mao wondered. The eunuch was talking to other serving girls nearby as well. Whatever was going on, it involved more than just Mau Mau. They must need more hands for some chore or other, she reasoned. She set the basket outside its proper room, then went following after the eunuch. The matron of the serving women's building was situated just to one side of the main gate, one of the 4 gates that separated the rear palace from the world outside. When the emperor visited his ladies, this was the entrance through which he passed. Despite being there on official summons, Mau Mau didn't feel comfortable in the place. Although it was somewhat lackluster compared to the headquarters of the Office of the Interior, located next door, it was still noticeably more ornate than the residences of the mid-level consorts. The railing was worked with elaborate carvings, and brightly colored dragons climbed the vermilion pillars. Urged inside, Mau Mau was somewhat less impressed than she had expected to be. The only furnishing in the room was a single large desk. 10 or so other serving girls besides her were present, and they seemed animated by anxiety, anticipation, and a strange sort of excitement. "All right, thank you. The rest of you may go home," the eunuch said. "Huh?" Mau Mau felt unnatural, being singled out this way. She went alone into the next room as the remaining women left with suspicious glances in her direction. Even for the chamber of an appointed official, it was a large space. Mau Mau looked around, intrigued, whereupon she noticed that all the serving women in the room were looking in one particular direction. Sitting unobtrusively in the corner was a woman, attended by a eunuch, and not far away was another somewhat older woman. Mau Mau remembered that middle-aged woman to be the matron of the serving women, but the haughty-looking lady she didn't recognize. Now she registered that the person's shoulders were rather broad for a woman's, and their dress was so plain. Their hair was mostly held back by a sort of scarf, the rest of it cascading down behind them. "He's a man?" He was surveying the female servants with a smile as soft and gentle as that of a heavenly nymph. Even the matron was blushing like a girl. Suddenly, Mau Mau understood the flush in everyone's cheeks. This had to be the immensely beautiful eunuch of whom she heard so much. He had hair as fine as silk, an almost liquid presence, almond-shaped eyes, and eyebrows that evoked willow branches. A heavenly nymph on a picture scroll could not have competed with him for loveliness. What a waste, Mau Mau thought, not remotely blushing herself. The men in the rear palace were all eunuchs, deprived of their ability to reproduce. They now lacked the equipment they needed to bear children. Precisely how gorgeous the offspring of this man would have been would remain a matter for the imagination. Just as Mau Mau was thinking, with no small amount of impertinence, that such almost inhuman beauty might ensnare even the attention of His Majesty, the eunuch stood up with a flowing motion. He went over to a desk, took up a brush, and began to write with elegant movements of his hand and arm. Then, with a smile as sweet as ambrosia, he displayed his work to the women. Mau Mau froze. "You there, with the freckles," it said. "You stay here." That, at least, was the gist of it. The beautiful man must have noticed Mau Mau's reaction, because he turned his fullest smile on her. He rolled up the paper again and clapped his hands together. "We're done here for today. You may all go back to your rooms." The women, with plentiful, disappointed glances back over their shoulders, exited the room. They would never know what had been written on the nymph's paper. Mau Mau watched them leave, and after a moment it occurred to her that they were all petite women with prominent freckles. But they hadn't heeded the sign, which must mean that they couldn't read. The message hadn't been for Mau Mau alone. She made to leave the room with the others, only to feel a hand placed firmly on her shoulder. With much fear and trembling, she turned around to find herself confronted with the almost blinding smile of the nymph man. Now, mustn't do that," he said. "I want you to stay behind." That smile, so bold, so bright, wouldn't take no for an answer.